Good evening. My name is Alpa Jabarian. I'm the producer and the host of the weekly USA Armenian Live TV program on AMGA TV. And I'm also the managing editor and the executive publisher of print editions of English language USA Armenian Life magazine and Armenian language Haigyank Armenian Weekly, as well as the editor of the USA Armenian Life Facebook page, armenianlife.com, and weekly electronic newsletter that's sent via e-blast to tens of thousands of Armenian and non-Armenian readers around the world, reaching a readership audience of over 500,000 individuals. Our guest today is Mr. Garbis Koragian, who is recognized by several governments around the world for his work as a consultant in the World Bank, Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the United Nations Development Agency, UNDP, the government of China, and the Foreign Affairs Ministry of the Republic of Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, a graduate of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government in Public Administration, specializing in ethical leadership. Mr. Koragian has built a solid record as an international consultant and trainer on good governance, ethical leadership, anti-corruption education, and social accountability. Thank you, Mr. Koragian, for taking time out from your very busy schedule and join our viewers today.
It is my pleasure, Mr. Jabarian.
In the last 30 years since independence, Armenia has had three presidential administrations, followed by the Prime Minister's administration. From 1991 to 2018, Armenia was governed by a presidential administration where the bulk of the executive powers laid in the hands of the president. The first president, Levon Ter-Bedrosian, served from 1991 to 1998. He came to power right after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the independence of Armenia. Armenia was recovering from the 1998 Spidak and Gyumri earthquake and was facing economic hardship and shock after the fall of the Soviet Union. Factories were unjustly closed and the country faced economic hardship and high rate of unemployment. Factories were illegally dismantled, sold as scrap metal to Iran. Ter-Bedrosian was implicated in corruption over the wholesale of scrap metal to Iran, which effectively destroyed the rail system in Armenia, depriving Armenia from a very vital rail system. Armenia fought the Artsakh Nagorno-Karabakh Liberation War from 1988 to 1994 and emerged victorious. As Armenians were ready to liberate Nakhichevan, which was given as a gift by Soviet dictator Stalin to the newly formed Azerbaijani Socialist Republic, reportedly Ter-Bedrosian sabotaged those efforts. In 1998, Ter-Bedrosian crossed the red line when he publicly expressed willingness to make territorial concessions to the Azerbaijani Republic that had just lost the war against Armenia. In response to strong popular demands, then Defense Minister Vasgen Sarkisyan forced Ter-Bedrosian to resign. Acting Prime Minister Robert Kocharian was elected the second president of Armenia. President Kocharian ruled Armenia with an iron fist. He was responsible in the murder of 10 peaceful citizens demonstrating peacefully in Yerevan. Under Kocharian, oligarchic system, which was created under President Ter-Bedrosian, continued to flourish. Kocharian served from 1998 to 2008. the second presidential era, although registered some successes, but it also registered major socio-economic political failures. Serge Sarkisian, the second and third presidents with President Serge Sarkisian and Robert Kocharian, with Serge Sarkisian coming to power through electoral fraud, vote rigging and intimidation. Apparently, at the time when he was elected, many Armenians in the diaspora were clueless about the inner workings of Armenia's election system. Sarkisian replaced Kocharian and ruled the country under the cover of complete terror, formed a 25,000 strong police force. They used brutal force to quell peaceful demonstrations. Under President Sarkisian, corruption, nepotism, and mismanagement continued to flourish in Armenia. And the same process took place in the Armenian Church under Karakin II. In 2018, in order to emulate Russia's President Putin, Vladimir Putin, Sarkisian promoted changing of the constitution, transferring executive powers to the Prime Minister's office, and his Republican Party of Armenia parliamentary majority elected him as the Prime Minister, helping Mr. Sarkisian perpetuate his stay in power. A week after being elected as Prime Minister, Sarkisian resigned under pressure from citizens and tacit support of wide circles of the Armenian diaspora. Mr. Korajan, what factors contributed to bringing change in Armenia and the importance of Armenia moving forward? What can you say about that?
Thank you, Mr. Jabarian. Thank you also for your comprehensive background information on our three presidents and the Prime Minister, our new Prime Minister. Change was brought to Armenia because of citizen dissatisfaction of its ruthless leaders. This makes the premise of the entire Armenian state. People were dissatisfied in every aspect. They were unhappy with the level of corruption, which was rampant in the country. They were unhappy about the electoral fraud. They were unhappy about customs regulations. In every part of their life, every segment, to acquire a passport, to get a driver's license, to get a permit for land transfers, there was full-fledged bribery involved. While all this was happening, our leaders were immune of the situation that is taking place in the country while they were preoccupied with accumulating their wealth, to a degree where their government became a kleptocratic government. Basically, kleptocrats are a group of leaders who thrive by stealing the resources of the country for their own personal benefit, while the citizens of the country are left out. Adding salt to the wound, on March 1, 2008, Kocharian ordered the killing of 10 peaceful demonstrators in Yerevan. This also solidified the power base for Sarkisian for another few years, until further demonstrations broke up and dissatisfaction was percolating to a point where it was going to explode. To quell corruption, as you said, Sarkisian had 25,000 strong police force. Every time the people went out to demonstrate peacefully, they were beaten, they were harassed, they were arrested, and they were put to jail. In all this, it is very sad to say we observe the exodus of 1 million Armenian citizens who left their country because of despair and all the unpleasant circumstances that were surrounding their land. And of course, the ability not to be able to raise a living wage, not to be able to put bread. They were forced to live with their parents in crammed up old Soviet Union buildings. I mean, it was so unpleasant that anyone who could leave the country left the country. These are, in fact, people who would have never left their country if situations were good. I have talked with many Armenians and they said, we wouldn't have ever thought of leaving our country because we were happy and we loved our country. Anyway, the ones that stayed are living in poverty. We have almost 40% of the country is under poverty. And I forgot to tell you that the other day, I was reading this little article on the happiness index, global index, and they have ranked the Armenian population as one of the most unhappy people in the world. And we Armenians are happy people. We're always trying to make happiness out of nothing. So such dissatisfaction accumulated to a point where at one point it exploded. So, and as the suffering increased and they could not take it anymore, the local population, came a very interesting movement called the Velvet Revolution. It was spearheaded by the current Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan. Started with 5 members, started walking out of Gyumri and accumulated and became one of the largest civil rights movements of Armenia. Bowing down to pressure, Serge Sarkisyan resigned, and Nikol Pashinyan was eventually elected within a couple of weeks and became the Prime Minister of Armenia. So it is important to mitigate all this dissatisfaction, the corruption, and the judiciary unfairness, and the pressure that the Armenian people have by providing them basic employment. Otherwise, Mr. Jabarian, I can tell you, our nation is at a risk of survival.
Many Armenians in Armenia and the diaspora are asking why the justice system of the first 2 years of Pashinyan administration has been not able to bring to justice not even a single oligarch. What needs to be done to maintain the current momentum?
One of the most important things to do right now is to change the constitution. In the last year of Sarkisyan's presidency, he changed the constitution from a presidential system to a parliamentary system. That was done primarily for him to be elected as prime minister, which has no time limitation on how long he can run the country. So it was not enough that he embezzled the country for 8 years. Now he wanted to rule the country, replacing the constitution and favoring basically the oligarchy. And in this constitution, there are many missing links. The judiciary reform, the replacement of the constitutional courts. And, this has also tied the hands of Mr. Pashinyan's government. And as you might remember, in March, there was going to be a vote on the constitutional order of a referendum. And because of the COVID virus, it was postponed. So the other factor is, of course, the constitution has to be changed, is that, it's not really an easy thing to prosecute powerful people. Powerful people have powerful friends, powerful people have money, powerful people can have the best lawyers in the world. They can afford anything, so they're resisting. And the reason they're resisting, basically, is to buy time, because they know well that they're never going to come back to power, but they don't want to go to jail. And these greedy, selfish leaders of ours, they don't want to lose their wealth and the privileges that is bestowed on them. So it is important, and the constitution should and must change. And of course, we have to apply also different meaningful changes, and that will suit the present situation, and also reform the judiciary at the local level, the police force. And these are the things. A total reform of the country is necessary right now to go ahead.
Reportedly, the present occupier of the holy seat in Holy Echmiadzin of the Catholicos of all Armenians, Karakin II, along with Western Diocese Primate Hovnan Derderian and his blood brother, who's the primate of the Russia Diocese, Yezras Nersesyan, have secretly formed an international cartel that has been integrated with the state-level kleptocracy, fostering religious kleptocracy within the Armenian Church. When the current administration led by Prime Minister Pashinyan started moving into the right direction in bringing kleptocrats to justice, and on April 13, when Armenia's National Security Service, which is the equivalent of the FBI or the KGB, raided the headquarters of one of Karakin II's and Hovnan Derderian's allies, the primate of Ararat Diocese in Armenia, Navasart Kjoyan, and arrested him on tax evasion charges as well as fraud and embezzlement on April 13. And on April 14, Karakin II tried, in order to cover himself and protect his own position, he resorted to using the coronavirus pandemic as a pretext, and he started using former President Robert Kocharyan's incarceration as a political card against Nikol Pashinyan government, and as well as in the same token, business tycoon Gagik Zarukyan, who is the head of Prosperous Armenia Party, is now using the government must resign demand in order to protect his status as an untouchable. So what are your thoughts on these developments?
My thoughts are, as we have in the past expressed ourselves openly to the public, that Karakin Catholicos, Karakin II, has worked and collaborated with the last two presidents, with both Kocharyan and Sarkisyan. During the last 20 years, Karakin II and his cartel, including Western Dioceses Primate Hovnan Derderian, Moscow's Yezras Nersesyan, France's Armenian Dioceses Primate Vahan Hovnanian, and a few others have collaborated, not secretly, openly with Robert Kocharyan. So there is sort of this relationship between this maybe, shameful church representatives of ours, our church leaders, should we say, with Kocharyan and the current government. They've embezzled and they have gotten excessively rich, especially Karakin, and he has manipulated the system, never coming to rescue when citizens were being beaten, arrested, and killed. He completely remained quiet. And now, when Kocharyan has been arrested and is going in and out of jail for the last 2 years, all of a sudden now he's looking for justice. Can you believe this? He is the leader and the spiritual leader of the people, and he didn't move a finger when the people needed him. But now all of a sudden he's helping Kocharyan. Of course, this has been made possible because he has to mask his guilt. And also at the same time, he has to pretend that he's reaching and helping Kocharian, his old gangster thug friend. So, unfortunately, now as we can see still, as I said to you earlier, even with this appeal of the Karakin to the president and the government, Kocharian remained in jail for a while, but he's going back and forth. And last week he was let go with a $2 million bond. And of course, back to appeal, back to a future trial date. So this has given these former leaders, including Sarukyan, anyway, let me say a few words about him. He was a hand wrestler, can you imagine? And eventually climbed the ladders of organized crime and established himself in a very, very well-to-do position in Armenia today. He owned cognac factories, he owns productions, and in fact, when I'm talking about that, I want my audience to realize that the entire economy is hijacked by the oligarchy. The former presidents own the biggest hotels, the biggest factories, the biggest natural resources. And also Saturian is not an exception. He's on their level. And of course, a few years ago, he joined the parliament, not to be touched, have that immunity, so to speak. But a few weeks ago, as you might have followed, he lost his immunity with a vote of 80 people in parliament, members of parliament, and he had to appeal to court. Can you imagine a powerful person, an untouchable person like Sarukyan going to jail? So he's going to do everything to fight, not in order not to go to jail. So this group of former leaders, and I call them thugs, like Gagit Sarukyan, Robert Kocharian, Serge Sarkisian, the treacherous Arthur Vanetzian, who was the head of the National Security Service. He betrayed Pashinyan and went and joined Kocharian. So they have formed now a sort of this criminal alliance to fight and to avoid going to jail. But as for them coming back to power, I highly doubt it. The people of Armenia, the youth, have now matured. They are the new generation whose consciousness, whose thinking, whose minds are different.
And very healthy.
You can give a couple of hundred thram and ask them to go and vote for Sirfer. These are boys and girls who have bright minds. And the present government actually is composed of these young brains of the country.
With the fall of the Soviet Empire and the disappearance of the Iron Curtain, Armenia's new generation, which many call the independence generation, had a unique opportunity to interact with their blood brothers in the Armenian diaspora, in the free world, and there has been an active period of exchanges between the Armenian diaspora youth and Armenia's youth. So now we have a fabulous new generation in the Republic of Armenia, and that's the generation that's fighting for Armenia's status as a sovereign state, by all means. The new generation also recognizes the fact that Armenia is facing the existence of an international cartel which has big plans for itself to the detriment of the Armenian people. This cartel was established with the participation of many oligarchs in Armenia, along with the head of the church, Karakin II. Karakin II organized his own church-based cartel. By the way, many critiques of the Armenian church leader are not criticizing the church as an institution, but they're criticizing the corrupted leadership. We must distinguish between a criticism directed at the corrupted leaders and protection of the church. Many of the Karakin second loyalists or lackeys, many say, are falsely accusing that critiques of the Armenian Church, critiques of Karakin II are also critiques of the Armenian Church. What do you say to that, Dr. Korajan?
This was actually a mindset that we saw many years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And when I started writing about Karakin and his corruption, I would get personal phone calls and they would say, "Oh my God, how can you do that? You're gonna die. You're gonna be going to hell, and this and that." But now, less and less people are calling or are questioning the integrity of Karakin. Our church is an institution on its own. These are people who are elected, and they are sitting on the throne and they're running their life. And they happen to be extremely corrupt. Although it is mutually exclusive, we should never confuse these two facts. The church is a church. It's an establishment. It's a place where I go and I pray. It's a church where my children go and pray. It's where we get married. And we believe in our faith. But hating or criticizing the Catholicos does not mean that you are not a good Christian, a good Armenian Christian, or you hate your church. So this has to be made clear. These are people who are abusing their power, who are exploiting our church for their own benefits, who are running more or less a private life of rich people, having their own families, their own children, their own wealth, and all this together. And it is for us, when we see this, irregardless of being Karakin and Catholicos, we have to speak, and we should be ashamed for keeping those kind of crooks and thugs in the helm of our religious organizations.
Karakin II, Hovnan Derderin here in the Western United States, and Germany's Armenian Diocese Primate Serov Bey Isakhanyan and others that are part of the Karakin cartel have been trying to hijack democracy within the Armenian Church, but luckily for the Armenian Church, the parishioners, members of the church, the lay people, Ashkaraganner, they are fighting back to protect the church so that they could get rid of kleptocracy and the corrupted religious leadership so that the church can preserve its rich history and healthy status. Going back to the revolutions that happened recently in and around Armenia, in that region, what is the distinction between Ukraine's Orange Revolution and Armenia's Velvet Revolution, Mr. Korajan?
It is a very interesting comparison that you made, because Armenia and Ukraine were both a part of the Soviet Union. So they have the same background, the same sort of a mindset. And when these revolutions, peaceful revolutions, or supposed to be peaceful revolutions, started, Ukraine went through what is called the Orange Revolution. Basically, Ukraine's Orange Revolution had one goal in mind. It was to kick the Russians out of their country and take over completely their own country, because they, because of the port, the naval base, and the importance of Ukraine as compared to our country, Armenia, the Russians were doing their best to stay there and dominate. Anyway, at the time, the president of Ukraine, Mr. Yanukovych, was extremely pro-Russian. So they removed him and they placed him with a pro-American, pro-Western president. Now, the situation in Armenia is entirely different. The uprising in the Armenia, and of originally the small ones and the bigger ones which were quailed down, but the Velvet Revolution was not directed against the Russians. It had nothing to do with Russians. It had to do all with mitigating, fighting unfairness, injustice, and also the removal of their president from Armenia. So this, while both are sort of fruit and velvet revolutions, they varied. One did not want the Russians, but we have said, Russians are welcome in, we have good policy with the Russians because we have 3 million Armenians that live in the Soviet Union. We have to maintain good ties. We were part of the Soviet Union for 50 years. We have had good relationships with the Soviet Union. Our children went and got their education in the Soviet Union, and our scientists were allowed to work in their country. So we have no qualms and no hard feelings with the Russians as it stands. And it shouldn't be. The same it should be with the Americans. We have to have good relationships. But what distinctly separates these two revolutions was, one was an anti-Russian revolution, and one was a revolution for justice.
Thank you for also mentioning the importance of Armenia developing multi-level, multipolar, can you elaborate just for 20 seconds on that one?
Armenia has to actually develop a non-aligned policy which will not let its country be dominated either by the Soviet Union or Russia or the United States. They should maintain their own policy independently and resist pressure from the superpowers and run their country in a harmonious way to benefit the livelihood of and to improve the livelihood of our people.
Thank you so much. And we shall continue at a later date. We shall continue our discussion with Mr. Karajan on many, many important topics, and have a wonderful evening.